So I'm going to preface this by saying none of what I'm going to say is intended to sort of shame or blame the carers because they're really in an extraordinary position of having to care for someone with this condition, and it's so hard. And so, if what I say, resonates, and you think, okay, I have been doing that, everyone's just doing their best, and I hope this will offer an insight into actually these sort of unmet needs, which at the time, especially if we're dealing with sensory issues, we can't always articulate our needs very well. So as someone who's been through it, I hope this will offer an insight as I draw from my own experience. So yeah, as I said, if you don't relate to it, it's going to be coming from more of a place of severe to moderate than mild ME and post-infection syndromes. Um, but the themes and the tone of the care, I think it will all be relevant to whatever you're dealing with. And so I also suggest you watch the video I've made about what this illness is, my opinion of what this illness is before. And I think that will, help you by coming on the journey. Not that you need to become an expert in the science, but it all helps. And yeah, so we'll start with the crux of the matter, which is nearly all medical situations. Normally there's support and there's relief from the doctors, and the family don't need to go into this extraordinary strange world where you have to figure it out for yourself without the help. So someone is knowledgeable, and there's someone taking charge. They're providing a route through the illness. There's a template that's been used time and time again. And as the carer, you can relax knowing that, obviously this is sort of the Western world, but you can relax in knowing that, even if it's a really bad prognosis, that someone knows what they're doing and the best path of action. With these illnesses, you have, three options. You have fighting for recognition and medical professionals just not believing or not taking you seriously, or the sort of quite equally dysregulating, scary thing of very compassionate practitioners, but sorry, I literally don't know anything about this. I don't know about this condition. And that's, well, I mean, it's certainly, better intentioned, but it's all equally very scary. And, the third option, which I can only really talk about the UK, and in recent years where things have changed in the last couple of years, but up until then, actually the advice, the GET, which stands for the graded exercise therapy, um, as a standalone, is probably the worst idea you could do. No, I mean, certainly if someone's mild enough and I think their environment's right, it might help, and it might very slowly retrain a response, and your way out of it. But I think for most people, you're missing such a big slice of the problem. It's resulted in many people going from a mild situation to wheelchair bound, bed bound for decades. And, you know, don't even get me started on hospital care for severe patients, which, is something really we've had recently in the UK where a family member had to camp in a hospital car park to manage the care of their family member in hospital, and was trying to educate the hospital staff on the sort of the POTS element with the feeding tube, and how, you literally at that level of severity, you cannot be elevated. To be elevated is so exhausting, and we're talking, you know, tiny degrees of being elevated up off a cushion, and the hospital staff sort of arguing. Anyway, I don't really need to go into it too much, but you need to become at that level highly involved and knowledgeable, and meeting the needs of the person you're caring for. And how extraordinary, because it's so against everything jarringly against everything we're told. We go to the doctors, we're told what to do, we either get better or we don't, but there's, it's someone else is accountable in a way. And this illness really challenges that in every single way. As someone who has been as ill as that, where it's hard to express to a medical team the difference between lying completely flat and then having the elevation of maybe two pillows propping you up, and how exhausting. And even as I say this, like, I remember it very vividly, but how exhausting that level of blood pressure stress or whatever it is. I'm hoping most people listening to this aren't caring for people who are at that level, but it's a very strange thing to even watch. When long COVID happened, I remember watching a BBC News documentary short on what long COVID clinics were offering. And it was sort of just ridiculous, because they were getting people in and they were timing them to power walk up and down a corridor within the hospital, and then taking some heart measurements and breathing measurements, presumably, and then sending them home. And these people were buckled over, and it was very sad to see, but that's what they were offering. And obviously, when I'm talking about long COVID, I'm talking about not people who went into the ICU and had very severe COVID symptoms. I'm talking about mild infections, which, end up being ME, and offering them, that's what they were offering them, just exhaustion. And to put it plainly, in the wrong situation, you're literally putting people into wheelchairs if you do that, if you're pushing them and giving them no understanding of what's really happening. And the understanding is beginning to filter in. I really do think it is, from the research level. So it's something that you have to just come to terms with as a carer, that if you're watching this, you probably understand that your best route is via watching recovery stories, and the common themes come through again and again: limbic brain, nervous system, brain training, somatic work, safety at every level, and removing stress in every single way, and sort of allopathic stress. So that's viral stress, that's emotional stress, that's toxic stress, blood sugar stress. This is the route out of it. Now, obviously, I don't make any claims that I fully understand this condition, and I certainly don't. And there's so many nuances: the cranial cervical spine issues, Lyme disease, post-concussion issues. But I do have a pretty broad understanding of a path when you examine the dysautonomia and the PEM. And yeah, as I said, you go to the limbic brain, overprotection mechanism, which is faulty, and you look at the downstream effects of the autonomic nervous system. And so this is stuff which is now starting to break through. The use of neuroplasticity over time to rewire neurological signals. For someone, who's a carer, I think the abandonment by the official channels medically is so hard for some people to wrap their heads around. And I see that a lot from people who have a sort of medical background, or maybe a very conventional background. And I think they're the people that struggle with this most. Luckily, I was always someone who was already quite into sort of alternative methods and quite anti-establishment. And so, yeah, maybe I found this work faster, even though, as I say, this is stuff which is medically, at a PhD being looked at and worked with. It's when I'm talking about the sort of mainstream, I'm talking about sort of level 1 GP kind of work. So it's going to take a big leap for some people that you can actually do this by yourself, and it's actually a very empowering message. But I see a lot in the stories I've listened to, and hundreds of people's stories read, listened to, and especially with children who get this. And I see, we have children who are probably quite sensitive to begin with, and they see their parents in such extreme stress, fighting for them medically, basically. And obviously, as I said, if you're in a hospital situation, the parents need to, learn fast and fight. But I'm talking before it's got to that level, I can see how a child would witness their own physical issues being such a burden and stress onto the parents, and actually that just making it even worse. And so this is such an important message I hope you can take from this, is managing your own nervous system around this, because we're dealing with probably sensitive children to begin with, or teenagers or people in their 20s, whatever it is. And then you add on top of that this hypersensitized brain, which is reading the face, reading the body language, literally co-regulating with their caregiver who is experiencing, a fight with, I know of people's parents who, literally entered like legal fights with medical professionals. And so I can understand that's them practicing what they believe is like good parenting. They're fighting for their children. And they are being good parents. They love their children. There's no doubt about that. But another route is desperately needed. In the first place, you're not going to get the correct care from these medical institutions. You're just not. So you need to emotionally remove that expectation. And then secondly, as I said, you need to manage your own nervous system around that child or person. And actually, it's not even child. That goes for whatever age group you're going through this. Not bringing that stress of the situation to them, because they're already really living in hell. So if you're listening to this and the person you're caring for has not come to any conclusions or listened to any recovery stories and seen the patterns and associations that has led them to believe that, okay, maybe I can in time learn to rewire, these faulty neurological signals, just in the same way someone with a stroke can relearn how to walk again. Maybe this is the path for me. If this is something you're learning about, I think the way to go about bringing it up is certainly not to, coin the term mind body work and go, good news, you're in a wheelchair, but it's all a mind body condition, because certainly it's a neurological, very, very real situation. But, the whole time the person with this situation will be expecting the worst, expecting abandonment, expecting like the worst level, like needing to protect, at a pathological level, their body is in deep flight or fight freeze response the whole time. And so coming to them with, this knowledge of like, okay, this is actually not as serious as, that sort of tone is obviously only gonna just leave them feeling like you don't really understand what's happening and you don't believe them, and that will be a threat. But at the same time, you need to just go gently and guide them towards recovery videos. I suggest on YouTube, Raylan Angle or Heal with Liz, hundreds and hundreds of people who mostly recover using, even as I say, mind-body techniques. It sounds like I'm doing it down. It's not. It's, it's neuroplasticity work. Another area to observe within the person you're caring for is, in a very gentle way, guide them towards hope and recovery. Maybe this sounds quite obvious, rather than, believing what the charities say, believing what, some doctors will tell you that this is lifelong. We need to move away from that and just completely show the brain a different path. And that's really the root of neuroplasticity. A signal is being sent and you're saying, no, we're going to do something else. We're creating something else. And so we're getting away the whole time from, this is hopeless, this is what this situation is forever, you need to show the brain something new, which is recovery stories again and again and again. And I watched, hundreds and hundreds of them. And it kept me believing, even though I didn't know how it was going to happen, I believed it was possible. So I was lucky in that I was always heading towards like, I'm going to recover, I'm going to recover. And for a second, maybe like a month, I went down, I don't know, the best way to describe it is sort of victim celebration, where it's your Instagram name, becomes something sick, something to do with being sick. And you see it often, people are celebrating and, really absorbing their identity into an illness. And I think there's lots of things I could say about that, but very obviously from the carer perspective, that's something you don't want to be mean and sort of call them out for it. But that's, I would say, a bit of a warning sign if you see that person is making the focus their identity with that illness rather than their focus recovery. And I think, with a younger generation, so I'm 36 as I say this, and people younger than me with this, so much of the way they do things is sharing photos and putting stuff up on social media. And I feel quite sad when I see people just, all their photos are just them in a wheelchair, them with walking sticks, and it's just, again, and it's not, here is a picture of me at the beach, and yes, I'm in a wheelchair. It's like, it's me and the wheelchair, and there's no other focus. And I do understand, truly I do, because I could see my brain going down that route. Luckily, I pulled myself out of it for about a month. Life is so hard, and so you just want, quite literally, some likes. You want some people just to see you and see what you're going through. And social media, obviously, really wires your brain for the sort of like culture. And as someone who has put out recovery information online, and I'm sick, look at me, how sick I am, information online on social media, you will get so much more of a positive response from the sick community being sick. And that's their theme, being sick is their identity. I'm sick, but I can recover. So I hope that makes sense. But you need to guide the person you're caring for into just watch this recovery story again and again and again. The elephant in the room with this illness is how difficult the people living with it are. And just be aware that most people with this illness know how illogical and relentless the sort of needs are, to make them feel safe. And that could be a sensory need, that could be an emotional need, that could be a physical demand. It's really, I can see how it would be completely draining to care for someone with this illness. But, the good news is to be a carer with, to cater to someone at that level and to create the ease that they're looking for and sort of ease that internal stress. It won't be forever. And that's the good news. Like, we need to basically land in a safe place. And I'll go into what I mean by safe. We need to then have an environment that remains safe, and there's daily, minute by minute proof that this place is safe. And I'm talking really from a limbic perspective. So your limbic brain is, filtering away information the whole time on room temperature, eye contact, emotional history, light, noise, vibration, all this stuff. Like, the brain is filtering it, and it's basically deciding, are you safe, on a real primal level. And so we need to create an environment of like deep healing and safety and emotional, unconditional connection and love, and quietness, if that's what you need right now. Just trusting your environment in such a deep way. And then you probably need to stay there for a while, and it needs to be proven to you the whole time, but look, it's safe, nothing's happening. And once you then can stabilize that and learn your toolkit of how you're going to modulate your nervous system and rewire it, then you start going out into environments which are challenging and learning how to rewire, and obviously getting symptoms. And I'll talk a bit about how you handle that as a carer. But it's not forever. A little example of that was when I first went back into my parents' house and really just needing and asking, which was the big difference. Normally it would just have seemed ridiculous, but I really needed to ask that anytime someone came into the room, that they looked at me and they smiled at me. And so immediately my very hypervigilant brain goes, this person is here and they're happy and they're okay. And I mean, it says a lot about how I wired my brain as from early years, but that's such a big thing. But learning that there's nothing, this person is okay, and then co-regulation, that means I'm okay. I don't need to do anything. They're not angry. I'm not in trouble. I mean, it's really basic, very, I was about to say childlike or animalistic levels of like primal safety, that the people around me are okay and there's no danger and there's no trouble. And so I had to like ask for that need. I said, when you walk in the room, can you just smile at me? Eye contact and smile. And immediately, my symptoms would be a lot better. But obviously this is further along the line. If you're still with someone at a severe level, obviously it's going to be different. But, accepting whatever, however ridiculous it sounds, there will be a logical in the ME mind or the CFS, whatever we're calling it, post-infection brain, that there's a reason and there's a soothing that comes from asking for something and having that need met. The brain just needs so much proof. And, for me, it's something that's taken years, and not for everyone, it won't be that. But I just want to give a little story that will maybe express, if you have someone with severe ME, the level of hypersensitivity. And, I don't expect anyone who's a carer to fully ever get it. But as I can now talk and express it, I think it's useful, because otherwise you just go, what is going on? Like, it is a complete neurocognitive collapse. But for example, I once, when I was just before I got very severe, there was a truck and it was backing up, so it had a loud sort of beeping reverse sound. And at the same time, a woman was on her phone talking very loudly, and I was on the street. And just these noises were so overwhelming that, it's not even saying, oh, it was really stressful. It was emotional. It was shocking. The sensation, it affected my breathing, my blood flow, my circulation. It was, I try and say, what in my old life before I got ill, what would it be equivalent to? And really it was shock. How can just such a just normal kind of noise found in a town trigger my brain to such an extent that on one hand, I'm logically almost laughing, going, oh my God, this is nothing, but why is my body doing this against my will? But the other part was like almost emotional from the shock, like you would feel if you maybe had a small car accident and you, I don't know, smashed your wing mirror. It's not dramatic, but it is shocking. You're like, oh my God, that happened. And your breathing would be affected. And you might feel like a little bit like crying, a bit emotional. It would be akin to that. And it's just extraordinary, really, that your brain could misread and misfire and alter your autonomic nervous system function so severely. And obviously, in time, that would become sort of a mitochondrial shutdown and muscle shutdown in the legs. So, at a really basic level, after that example, we're dealing with a level of stress which is just ridiculous. So let's remove stress in every form as much as possible from the person. So something like admin, just take it off their hands. Just take it off their hands. Something like, because, I don't know what level people are at, but, some people can't read, you can't cognitively take in the words. because their brain is in such a basic survival animalistic part. Anything involving steps of sort of forward thinking and putting something together to achieve something, it's just that part of the brain is just offline. And so very simple functions. I remember having to do something at the post office, like you'd have to get to the post office, get a piece of paper, fill out the form, get it back to the post office. I couldn't see a route of how I could achieve, which sounds really strange, but as I said, that sort of prefrontal cortex part of the brain is just offline of how you do things. The person with this illness really is just looking for such a sort of basic primal level of stability. The vestibular brain, certainly my experience and an experience of others, it's often to do with the sort of dizziness or internal sort of vibration that our brains seem to be unable to really ground and find center. The vestibular system really is a very ancient part of the brain, and it's sort of involving whether we know we're up or down and sort of what function to produce after that, of knowing where we are. And if we think that, that's so primal, that's so animalistic and basic, that is what we're struggling with. So don't even attempt to do something like taxes or something like that. That just needs to be completely taken off someone who's recovering's hands. But as I said, we're not in the long term going to have to do this. This isn't, as a carer, this isn't, fingers crossed if you get the right information and you keep going. And like I said, it may take years, but this isn't going to be forever, and it certainly won't be as bad forever. Things get better the whole time. And so, yes, you're taking responsibility, but try not to resent them too much, because, things will come back online. From a sort of auditory perspective, as this is such a sort of sensory illness, you don't need to say much. Hugging someone, if they can handle touch, if they can handle sort of auditory stuff, saying again and again, you're safe, you don't need to do anything, we're connected, you have unconditional love, you have, this connection isn't going anywhere, you're safe. Saying that again and again, it really is, as I said, the brain is constantly looking for the worst case scenario to keep you safe. And so it does need repetition for these things to actually land and be absorbed. In my experience, often a lot of the unconscious programming for people with this contains a sort of pressurized program of achieving patterns. It might be sort of perfectionism, or maybe just this kind of pressure, I'm failing to achieve. And so then you take a situation where someone loses function and they can't work and they can't work their programs which give them value, whether that's being carers themselves, or making lots of money and achieving in a sort of business sense, or whatever it is, you take that away from people. And let's whirl that back. We can see that it would have been some sort of clever survival tactic, to be just a people pleaser. And now you can't speak and you can't walk. Well, how are you going to get any value? Because you can't people please. You can't be, sociable and sort of get your value from them that way. That's deeply scary. That's deeply, dysregulating for someone, that they can't work their programs from childhood, which have kept them, within the tribe. The person with this illness may have an awareness in time of the programs that they were running, because they normally will be the ones that, when they can't run them, they'll get the worst symptoms. And so, if they're able to talk through these things and come up with unique strategies where we can sort of unpick this and unwind this and meet those needs. So as I mentioned, the sort of warning signs, if someone's leaning far too much into a diagnosis and making it their personality, the opposite side of that is something I definitely have experience with, which is leaning into an obsessive recovery and sort of foreseeing the value that you could get from that and putting everything into, I need to recover, um, in a sort of really know-it-all, desperate, I must absorb all the science way. And that's certainly what I did. Endless courses, endless sort of, I haven't got enough. And I think a previous program was not enough, not enough. And so within my recovery, it's like, I don't have enough information. I'm not succeeding in this recovery enough. And so that's another option to watch out for. And as I said, when I talk about this stuff, which is very much the sort of psychological elements of this illness, I just want to make sure that there's no part of me that doesn't 1,000,000% know that this is a full physical situation. As as someone who was bedbound, couldn't walk, all that stuff for years, like this is deeply physical, but there is no such thing. There's no separation within, the brain and the body. And so this is the sort of the underlayer, which I think is, I could talk about, what the best power wheelchair is, but actually this is the underlayer of that allopathic stress, which is driving symptoms. So yeah, I was doing endless courses, and yeah, quite honestly, this achieving via my recovery is an oxymoron, because for God's sake, your legs don't work, you can't really communicate, you need to chill out, you need peace right now, you don't need to be trying to achieve the worst. Kind of the worst has already happened, like it's now time to let it go, and let this endless pushing stop, which people across the board with this illness so often, I certainly wasn't a perfectionist, but I see, there's so many high achievers and athletes, and yeah, a lot of top of the class type, high achieving types do get this. And at this stage, if you're listening to this and it's all quite overwhelming, I think so much of our nervous system is actually contained within the body. So actually just, as I said, if they're very severe, they won't be able to do touch, but most people can. And so don't worry about what to say, because you'll probably say the wrong thing. But touch, I mean, a hug, just, touching on the shoulder, just, it's so somatic and it's in the body and it's so soothing. And yeah, you're probably going to say the wrong thing if you go too much into symptom chat and trying to compare what they're going through with like a previous injury or whatever it is. It just is never, truly, it's such a unique, hard thing to explain. This neuroimmune, 1 minute you got a virus, the next minute your muscles aren't working. It's so hard to explain. And as a carer, it's best just to listen, and then immediately, almost like your brain training, let's come in with some really positive words going, you're so brave, you can do this, I know you're going to do this, this is so hard, and there's not a time limit. And I think that's quite important for so many of us who are like, in 6 months it'll be all gone, it'll be better. Well, maybe, but also maybe not. And so knowing that you have unconditional safety, and it's going to happen when it's going to happen, and there isn't a countdown, because that's quite a stressful thing to have a kind of clock countdown. So as a loving carer and you see a crash happen, I can understand why you would think disaster, oh God, we've gone back, the person's back in bed, the person's needing, it's a sort of come down, it's so frustrating. And I can see that it's something that could be perceived as something stressful and negative. But it is, I'm afraid, an essential part of kind of going back out into life and getting an exposure. And yeah, it might just be too much. And so even if the person with the illness is sad and devastated and, it's a setback, you need to be then very much the sort of the coach, get them back on track, make them watch more, if they're able to, sensory wise, watch recovery videos, remind them that this is part of how you retrain and reshape brain function. You have to have the exposure. You have to handle this in a way which is down-regulating your kind of overprotective mechanisms within the brain. And you can't really do it without going into new exposure. You can't just wait this out. It has to be, melded by challenges. And that's a really hard one to talk about if you're not actively living through it. And I understand that. So almost like less said, the better. Just get them back on track. It was always going to, they have to happen. They're a part of recovery. And they're not something that you go, oh no, what a disaster. Manage your own nervous system. And in the same way, I think if the person with the illness is suggesting going out into challenges, even if there'll be a crash, I think, bringing that fear and a negativity and that sort of overprotective nature from your own limbic brain and sort of cross-pollinating that with their limbic brain is just a no-no. You have to really be like, you can do it. Remember, we're building personal trust. The person their nervous system is trying to trust the body again, which is a major thing once you've lost function. Like being able to trust the muscles in your legs are going to be strong enough they're not just going to give way. I mean, this is so big. So often, obviously, like I keep on saying, not if you're just at mild level, this will all be, a little bit too extreme, but it's so important that the carer does not bring fear into the situation and be like, oh God, no, you're not going to be able to do that. You're literally setting that person up for, a big stress in their brain by doing that. And so this is really important, actually. And I think in this space is where massive kind of personal growth can happen for both the people caring for the person with the illness and eventually for the recovered patient. I can completely see that someone with this condition, the brain is so constantly looking for the danger to signal this cell danger response and shut down the cells. And I can see how a carer might be almost see it as extremely silly that it's so, needing to over reassure the whole time. But in truth, we're all co-regulating with one another and learning about your own behavior and how you're being in the world, quite honestly, and becoming more regulated. That's where, in time, this illness can change it, like a whole family's life, I believe. Our nervous systems are literally, they're electric, they're electromagnetic. You can't be isolated with another person. We're all getting a feedback from one another. And so learning to just become aware of your own regulation, your own breathing when you're talking about something, your own, what's your go-to? Is it immediately what's the problem, what's the drama, fear response? Or do you sort of laugh things off? The way you're talking to someone, how are you handling life's ups and downs? When you're presented with something, do you notice how your breathing changes? Are you sort of becoming, quicker, shorter breaths? Like it's stressing you out. I mean, that's a big one. I always think, someone with this illness, you immediately you're co-regulating with someone's breathing if they start doing that. The tone of your voice, the eye contact, the stress response in general, people with this illness feel it so much more. And our brain is just amazing how attuned it is to other people around you and their stress levels. So maybe from this, it's been a lot of sort of what you can do, but ultimately your goal as a carer is to guide this person back to, the self-trust. I mean, that's what the journey back to a balanced neuroimmune function it has to come from the person who's ill. It's not something that can be given by someone else. They have to build that inner nervous system resilience themselves. And as I said, it's a long journey, especially if you've lost a lot of function. There's a lot to rebuild neurologically. And so just like you would be advised not to be a sort of what they call a helicopter parent, where you're diving in and over controlling, you know, really the goal is, even if we're talking about a 40-year-old, is to allow personal accountability, personal choice, authentic expression within this safe container of, you know, if you have a crash, you'll have your glass of water and a meal. You don't, because your function can just slip away, and just having that reassurance that someone's going to be there to take care of you, as a safe container. I really do believe the environment is like this missing piece. There's a lot at the moment about neuroplasticity work, and it's lots of hacks and tricks and tapping, and there's all these different tools, and they're essential to learn. Having a brain training modality and your toolkit, I call it, is so important to a recovery. However, the missing piece, if you don't have the correct environment, I think it's going to be an uphill battle. You could do all the courses and learn all the different techniques, but we need, as humans, just the foundation for human life, and human nervous system resilience is safe connection. And when I say safe, I mean from a sort of animalistic tribal sense of safety. It's, eye contact, it's connection, it's knowing that other person sort of unconditionally loves you. It's amazing. You can do so much by caring for someone with this illness in the correct way. So I hope that's given you some ideas and advice. Thanks.